What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for your Overwatch, and today we're breaking down one of the most epic series in the Overwatch League thus far, Dallas Fuel versus LA Valiant. As we said on Twitter, this was more of a mistake-ridden matchup that ended up determining how a lot of these team fights and the maps went, and we'll get into breaking down some of these key moments and how they were mishandled and ultimately ended up giving LA the victory. But first, I want to discuss where these teams are at in relation to the rest of the league. Coming out strong and solid against both San Francisco and Dallas means that the LA Valiant look like a very stable team, but I really think we have to hold off jumping the gun on their power level, as this upcoming second week is really going to put them through the paces and be a much better test of what they're actually capable of. Both of these teams really have a very busy week ahead of them. Dallas Fuel has a rematch against the Outlaws on Thursday, then on Friday they play the London Spitfire, and the Valiant have to go up against the red-hot New York Excelsior, and then face the Spitfire themselves on Thursday and Saturday respectively. How both these teams fare in their upcoming matches will tell us a lot more about where they're at and where they're going. If LA can come out competitive and even steal a win from either of their upcoming Korean opponents, you can color me convinced. But until then, if we look critically at the matches they had against the Shock and the Fuel, the games were won by the team who played cleaner winning, and there was some pretty big mistakes that their opponents made to give them a relatively easy go of things. And I'm excited to see how the LA Valiant fare against much more disciplined opposition. But for now, we want to take a look and learn from what the Dallas Fuel is going through, because they're a team that going into the league, myself and many other analysts rated very highly. But I think the secret to the disappointment of the fans of Dallas Fuel comes down to how they're attempting to build this roster. There's sort of two directions you can try to grow your team in Overwatch if you're thinking of it from a management perspective, and it's the question of whether you're going to try to develop tall or wide. Wide would mean that you would spend a lot of time on many different strategies and try to stretch the hero pools of your team and what they're capable of, whereas growing tall would mean to have smaller plays in your playbook, but to be better at them. And ultimately, I think this is where the Dallas Fuel are coming into some problems early in week one. They seem to be treating almost every player on their roster as a starter, which is forcing somewhat of an awkward musical chairs with not just the players, but the roles that they're playing at any given time from map to map. And it's my belief that that's basically why they're looking quite up and down in these early games so far. The theory is, though, if you put in the hard work in order to build the roster this wide, over time, the flexibility will be stronger going into like the playoffs. But the problem is you got to get to the playoffs first. You have to win some games in order to even get there, which is kind of the issue and the reason why many Dallas fans are sweating with nervousness at how their team is performing. I think it's very aspirational to try to build a very wide strategical playbook, but the Dallas Fuel might not be the best team to do that with because they have too many specializations across their roster. And as they start to pull out the Jenga pieces, they're able to come into a match with a very interesting strategy. But based upon their personnel, their individual players aren't necessarily flexible enough to then upend and swap strategies entirely. So long story short, Dallas Fuel fans, I think you're in good hands with Kyky developing this roster, and it might take a little while for them to get things figured out. I do wish that they would simplify their game plan a little bit. We're not in the preseason anymore. There's no need to have to sub everybody in all the time, but we'll just have to wait and see how it works out for them. Before I hop into breaking down some of these team fights, I want to mention that with Overwatch League up and running, I'm proud to announce that I have plans to do VOD reviews more long form on Twitch. The schedule and how often, I'm still working out. I don't want it to conflict with anything Overwatch League related for obvious reasons. I want to watch it myself, but I'm really excited to use that platform and take the time to take this analysis even a bit slower and more in depth. And we can use the YouTube videos to be a bit more concise. And today I hope to provide more or less the Cliff Notes version of what that stream would be. One last thing to note before we get into breaking down the plays. Today's video is going to be inherently negatively focused. There's a lot of positive plays that we can break down from the Fuel in this matchup as well. But as we all know, it was a wasn't enough. They ended up losing this series 3-0. So despite showing signs of their formal brilliance with some spectacular play from Taimou on the Roadhog, smart repositioning to set up for oncoming retakes, clutch play out of Seagull, and effect in parts, we're going to focus this video on more so the mistakes that were made in order for the map score to be so lopsided. All in the interest of learning and respecting the game of Overwatch. Starting off on Junkertown, going into overtime, Dallas Fuel actually had a massive time bank advantage going into this, which should be significant because as long as they play their ult economy correctly, it's very likely that they can beat any distance that the Valiant get with their superior ult economy. However, even though the Valiant only have 1 minute and 6 seconds left on the clock, they're going to be able to finish this map, which requires the defense to make some critical mistakes, and we'll take a look at what those are. Off screen, Mickie gets shredded quite early in this fight, and I have to think that it's because he overfaced against Soon's Bastion, shredding his barrier, which is the major reason why this fight starts to turn the other direction. Because even though Fuel gets some frags here, because they don't have an Orisa and the enemy do, Taimou is wide open to fall victim to the halt hook combination, which ends up snowballing the fight harshly, and then Dallas Fuel call for a regroup and they just die on cart to try to come back and retake again. Now, this next retake is a really odd shot call for a few reasons. Remember, the Fuel have a massive time bank advantage, so they by no means are in a desperation scenario now. They're in a play smart and win the game easily scenario. So with that being the case, there's not a reason to force an early engagement here at all. In fact, you could go ahead and let the Valiant have this checkpoint and use the time where the cart gets automatically stalled while the doors open to engage there and then clear them off the point. The way that you win a payload in overtime is just looking for one cart clear, not even necessarily a team wipe, but a cart clear with putting too many resources on the payload, meaning that the enemy have no choice but to either die or run off it, and that's how you win, which is exactly how the Fuel end up losing a fight that they were looking like they were going to win right at the end of their overtime push. If you eventually just throw too many lethal ultimates at the cart, they have no choice other to just lose. And that's the type of situation you want to build for yourself, but again, here on this first retake, Mickie is out way ahead of his team, as if he thinks he has to stop the payload from moving, but he doesn't. Far better to allow them the checkpoint and wait for your team to have a good engagement rather than playing too headlong towards the objective. Those of you that watched my USA versus Korea breakdown, you know how important it is to set up a clean engagement rather than forcing the objective too hard. Because this Junkertown attack team composition has too many threats for you to make any mistake. There's a Bastion, which is your first priority, and then 2 snipers that can dome anybody out of position. And even though the fight is very clearly a cart stall at best, for some reason Seagull tries to clutch out the tire, which even if it did get a kill, it would have been much better served to be combined with another ultimate in order to get a full cart clear. Okay, so that didn't go very well for the Fuel, but they're still not out of it. Even from this point, I still think they're favored to win if they handle this properly, but this next retake is quite poor as well. Kareev on the Valiant pops Widow sights in order to see the enemy retake come in from a mile away. This makes for a very easy halt hook combination on Taimou, who was not respecting the halt angle whatsoever, and the shot calling here is all over the place. Mickie goes in front out of sync. Custa tries to chase after him with the Transcendence, but it doesn't even land on him, meaning that we just had 2 tanks on the Dallas Fuel take an early peek one by one, just feeding into this setup, which is one that you have to execute perfectly on without a flaw. And really, any setup you try to retake into, if you peek early ahead of your team, the focus fire of your enemy is done for them, because there's nothing else to shoot but you if you're the first one in. Now, at the very least, the Valiant had a big ult advantage going into this fight, and very luckily for the Fuel, Valiant pop more resources than they actually need, equalizing matters now. And these next 2 fights on third, the tanks just aren't in sync with anybody. Look how far away the rest of Dallas Fuel are when both Taimou and Mickie make contact. You don't want this. You have to hang back out of halt range entirely before you make any contact with this cart, or else you will just feed your lives like this. And even onto the next attack, they don't learn that lesson, get exploited by the halt hook combination again, and that's it. The map's finished. Fate played amazing on the Orisa, and with some crucial Junkertown fundamentals not being respected, well, the Fuel just got all the points capped on them when the enemy only had a minute, which shouldn't happen. Okay, even with this all going wrong, the Fuel still have a chance to match. Fast forward, Dallas Fuel is able to roll through the entire map as well. Some cool plays by Seagull on the Hanzo. Effect hit some shots. They're able to roll it on through. Anybody's game once again. Going into double overtime now, the Valiant have a chance to attack, and the Dallas Fuel go with an interesting defense, quad tank, a team composition that you're going to see them pull out later in the series as well. It succeeds brilliantly against the Valiant's double sniper team composition, mostly because the snipers are a bit ineffective at dealing with the tanks. The single healer isn't going to be enough to mitigate the damage coming in from the tanks, and although Soon's Bastion does rip through tanks, it takes a while to do so. Bastion's great against chewing up tanks, but there's still going to be enough defensive tanking abilities to chew through before he can get to those health pools, and by then some squishy targets are taken out. Valiant swap quite well here. I actually think Kariv could swap to the Zenyatta and they'd be even stronger against this, but Envy swapping onto the Reaper is really going to make it even more difficult for the tanks to pounce onto the cart, because then you have two DPS characters that can rip and tear through their fleshy bodies. And here we're going to highlight a teamwork mistake, and something that I'm going to have to pick on Custa a little bit here, because I don't think he does a good job positioning himself in this re-engage, nor utilizing and managing his ability cooldowns. In fact, I'd go so far as to say is that when I saw Chips Hyen on the Moira, he looked even better on it than Custa has in any of the matches we've seen, and I'm not really sure why Custa's getting so much more playtime above Chips Hyen, other than the fact that he's the better Mercy player. But if you're going to be running Lucio Moira anyway, I say just put Chips back in. But Custa hangs far back, I assume to be worried about the Widowmaker lines of sight, but he's got so many fleshy bodies in front of him, why not use them to body block for him anyway, so that he can stay in range for his healing to hit his team. When he stays this far back, neither his primary fire or his orb really hit the mark, not to mention they went into this fight with him only having half of his resource anyway. And I'm very confident that if he played tighter with the team and his healing was able to land the mark, he would have definitely had this coalescence on time and things could have looked a lot differently. This could also be a teamwork issue as well. Perhaps Custa needs to communicate with the team that he's low on resource so that they don't take much damage, and maybe he goes and farms a little bit before they engage with the tanks. But either way, things aren't looking very good now, because this is two team fights you've lost in a minute, and the more that you lose beyond this point, the more difficult you're making it for yourself. And now Dallas Fuel's kind of in the hot seat. Really good retake positioning coming out of the Valiant. It might be easy to want to keep 3 on cart at all times to try to get this checkpoint for sure, but the Valiant spread out, Bastion far on the left, a few hovering around the cart, but they're setting up a big crossfire so that when this team fight comes in, if it does, they're able to just mow down Dallas trying to stall the cart. Turns out Dallas don't make it in time to contest the cart, but the Dallas tanks are hanging around up top looking to set up a counter engage, but once again, they're showing their faces way too soon, not respecting the range crowd control that can come out of either Fate or Agilities on the Orisa and Roadhog. And once Soon sees the Diva up top, Agilities knows that he can wait at the window and pulls Mickie out of this fight. Dallas Fuel scramble to try to catch up to him to get that fight on the cart. This is the fight that I said you could have set up in the previous overtime, right? When these doors are opening, it's a good time to fight as well. You just need one cart clear, but because Mickey's getting hooked, there's no tanking in place properly, damage just getting thrown at the Fuel, and Dallas just give another fight and give tons of value, because all the Valiant needed to use was the Bastion ult here, because the engagement was just so sloppy and haphazard. Okay, I've seen enough of Junkertown. I want to get to the other maps in this series as well. Let's move on to Horizon. Going on to Horizon, this map was insane as well, and we get to take another look at the Dallas Fuel quad tank on defense here, and Dallas looked to be running this very proficiently on the back of two factors. One, effect is good enough to get charge and be a lethal damage threat in his own right, and Taimou, even though I think he got a bit unlucky with some of those early hooks, is able to find the damage eventually. Using that Roadhog in this quad tank requires a top tier Roadhog, because you have to mechanically play so well to get the maximum damage potential out of that character, otherwise you're going to be significantly lacking in the DPS department with this comp. This next fight begins to brawl out, and I really like the way the Dallas Fuel are playing here. This is a highly teamwork dependent style of play that lets your tanks be very active in the fight and is going to thrive on really smart mid-fight repositioning to peel back, heal up, re-engage. The only problem is Uncle was able to farm up his Transcendence in time for effects grav, and the Dallas Fuel seem to be at odds on how their comp should be playing in this situation, which ultimately is going to force their fight to crumble even when they looked like they had an advantage. What went wrong here? Well, two things. One, I have a big criticism of Custa's playstyle on Moira. I think he's far too heal hungry, and that might sound crazy since Moira is such an effective healer, but I don't think he's managing his heal resource well enough. If he's a bit more greedy with the resource and doesn't try to just get his tanks all the way up to full HP every single time, but forces them to play a little bit smarter with their lives as they weave in and out of each other's tanking presence, defense matrix bubbles and shields to block more damage as they start to heal up, then Custa can have resource later into the fight rather than burning it all very early, which I think is what happens here. But on top of that, the team engage doesn't do him any favors because everybody splits up, and as we all know, Moira wants to hit multiple targets at once. That's the entire premise of this multi-tank comp working. I think Dallas Fuel really has to respect the call that the Reinhardt makes. This is an incredible aggressive play out of Coco, who's a player that we usually say plays too passively, but takes out the Mercy out of the Transcendence to insta-killer on the backside. Because of the CC of the Grav, even after Trance, he's able to pick up the kill onto the Zenyatta, but because his team doesn't commit with him, they're not able to utilize his shielding once he stops being offensive, meaning that these big targets that Dallas Fuel have are just bullet sponges out in the open without the Ryan shield to protect them. And keep in mind, Coco farmed up his Earth Shatter with all of this chaos. He could have turned on a dime and Earth Shattered the Valiant as they chased him into the small room, but everybody just gets too afraid of the engagement. Split up, Coco doesn't have enough resources for everybody. Even if he did manage it better, it probably wasn't going to be enough anyway. And that really subtle, poor positioning decision in the mid-fight went from an engagement I think they could have thoroughly won with no Valk possible on the enemy team and no healer alive either. All they had to do is sustain, even if they gave up the point, that you can let them have the point. Keep the engagement and give up a tick or two while you slowly regain your health. They didn't seem to know how they're supposed to handle this engagement, and it showed, and it lost them the fight. Maybe they didn't realize Coco was going to make a hero play like that, but I think if all else fails, if you're playing multi-tank, you have to play with your main tank, or else you're not really playing a good comp, you're just playing a bunch of ult battery characters against the enemy's range. And I do think multi-tank is very good with Moira when you play around your main tank. Later on in the match, they use the quad tank on attack, lots of time in the time bank. They look very well in control of this map, but a mismanagement of ultimates and the decision of where they're going to be fighting when seems just to be all over the place. It's pretty hard to see all this, but they have tons of ultimates to use, and I think at this point you would have to say they're favored going into this fight as long as they outplay the support ults, but they just rush out their utility a little too much. Coco uses Hammer Down, and Mickie uses Self-Destruct, but with the bubble in the way, it really only kills Fate. And I don't think there was any reason to force this out because the LA Valiant don't have a ton of damage. With the multi-tank, as long as you play with your Reinhardt a little bit more defensively, you could stay alive a lot longer against this enemy comp, but you don't have to rush out your resources this fast. They weren't in any threat at all. I think Coco just thought he saw the opportunity to crack the bubble and hopefully get a big hammer. This is a combo that they were famous for pulling off back in Apex, but now in the Mercy meta, using this many resources in order to just get 2 kills, well, gets nullified and in fact countered by Kariv's Mercy ult, which brings those targets back and lets them have more strength after that point because you have the Mercy healing and Unco pops his Trance as well. I'm not sure why, but Taimou tries to pop Whole Hog to kill the enemy's Mercy. This happens off screen, but the Valiant Transcendence comes in to save her, which is probably a bit too ambitious of a play, whereas if he just waited for effects grav in a few seconds, Taimou probably would have both taken less damage on himself and as well had a much more valuable Hog ult, but he goes down. Coco gets another charge kill through the Graviton and is able to brawl for so long he gets another Earth Shatter in this fight, which would have been sick value, but because Taimou died earlier, they just don't have enough damage to really make good use out of it, and Coco has to shield from the self-destruct anyway. The misplays here are just so small but so important. Multi-tank can be one of the most fun compositions to watch when it works because it requires better synergy than what we're seeing out of the Dallas Fuel here, a synergy that they used to have in spades, but I think because Taimou is trying to play a bit too much of a forward-facing flanking hog, and the tanks aren't using Coco's shield enough, they're forcing too much resource out of Custa to heal them up, and they took an opportunity to go into the upcoming overtime with a big lead, but squandered it to end up struggling on this map as well. Going into the final round of the map, Dallas Fuel were previously able to get first, but not second, giving them a scoreline of 5-4, and if they're able to hold Valiant for 2 minutes here on first, they take the map. Soon comes in with a sneaky flank on the backside to get Custa critical, allowing for Silk Thread to clean him up. With their single healer down, it's quite difficult to win this fight, but Effect and Mickie do some shake and bake in the counter engage in order to clean up some frags. Really well played by Effect, and even better yet, Dallas Fuel win it with their members alive, having taken a lot of damage, giving Custa a very early lead on Valkyrie. And what they decide to do with the next engagement of the Valiant, as they peel back, they catch the engagement with Valk, guaranteeing that win. But the problem is, this isn't the team fight they needed to win. They needed to win a fight against Los Angeles' Valk. In my opinion, the best thing to do on defense is to respond with an attacking Valk with your own Valk. Because unless you have offensive ultimates that get tons of value, the attacking Valk generally wins. The next coming fight comes in, Self-Destruct, Pulse Bomb, and Tac Visor get popped for 2 kills. The Valiant smile, giggle, use Valkyrie, res those 2 kills, and easily win from there. Between poor target priority and target focus, as well as ultimate usage, Dallas just isn't going to win this fight. There's no way. Whereas if Custa's a little bit more greedy with the best resource you have on defense to counteract the enemy incoming Valk, and if he just tries to win that other fight while holding it. I mean, they didn't even lose a member yet. He could have popped it after 1 frag and then clutched the fight back if they had to, but popping it so early just to guarantee a fight that you don't have to win now meant that the oncoming attack with Kariv's Valk from the Los Angeles Valiant was going to guarantee this fight unless you got massive value out of your lethal ultimates, which I think is especially important to note how bad of an engagement the Valiant took here into this corner. The Fuel outplayed this so hard with their positioning, they didn't need the support utility. Now, it can be very difficult in-game to know moment to moment whether this is a good decision or not, but I think, at least in hindsight, we can call this a mistake. The tanks from Valiant over-aggressed into this angle. Dallas didn't need the damage amp in order to eat it alive, and essentially with that decision, the way the Valk economy works, yes, Custa is going to get another Valk before the Valiant do, but all that does is give you a tie on second when you needed a map win. This is kind of one of those matchmaking-esque plays where you try to get more value out of your character but at the wrong time, and turning a map you could have won into one that you tie. On Ilios, I think a lot of things went wrong, especially in round 1. Seagull struggled to find the mark with his rockets, and also didn't position himself very well to avoid death either, but mainly this Lucio pick out of Harry, despite the fact that I love Lucio so much, doesn't really do enough to counteract the more meta team comp of the Valiant, because Unco Zen is going to add a lot more team damage, and the problem is the Fuel don't really use the speed in a meaningful way to justify its pick. They just get up to a poke engagement that a Zenyatta would have been better in, and slowly end up losing from there. I think if you use the Lucio, it's gotta be in conjunction with heroes that are going to see an amplified usage, like Reinhardt, Reaper, Doomfist, whomever, someone that can really benefit and give you a burst of value after you speed them in. Slow-moving tanks like Reinhardt and Roadhog can really catch the opponent out once they're sped in, but this dive comp out of Dallas just doesn't really need the speed boost anymore, considering how powerful defensive play is, and that's kind of the reason why LA are going to take this round quite convincingly. But we want to move on to the next round, where there is quite more to talk about, and a bit sad for Dallas Fuel fans because they came out swinging and took a very early control of this point, but lost it with some pretty key blunders. This first lost fight is a bit of a heartbreaker because it was a spot where Dallas could have won. Dives on both sides, and with a flash, both healers and both Widows are dead, leaving us with a 3v3. But the mistake here is too much W mouse 1 onto the objective. It's so much more important to sustain your life rather than be frag hungry in this situation, and if the combination of Seagull and the tanks did that better here, this Dragon Blade could have carried the entire fight. It's really important for Seagull and Mickie to be on the same page when this blade comes out, because the defense matrix could have really enabled for the blade to rip through anybody trying to contest the point. But because Seagull goes hero mode here against the hit scan damage of both Envy and Silk Thread, he's basically dead before the blade comes out, and there was no reason to panic that out when you have so many points still on the board. Let them have the objective, so what? Control the engagement and sustain yourself and win the team fight, because you can't lose control of the map. The objective doesn't matter until you're forced to have to care about it, and with such a lead, there's no reason to go take a duel against a diva with a Dragon Blade. Envy's been playing far too good in this series to think that that was going to go well for you, and I'm not exactly sure whose responsibility it should be in these tense shot calling situations, but it seems like Dallas is kind of split in how they want to play, and because the tanking wasn't there in time when Seagull wanted a Dragon Blade, well, he was able to get focused, but his tanks were right there. If he just waited like another second, it would have been good to go. You don't have to rush onto the objective worrying about them capping it. It's not important at that point. Okay, even with that being the case, they eventually frag out in order to retake control, going up to a 99 desperation scenario from the LA Valiant, but they pop Soon's Widowmaker ult, so they have wall hacks. They know where the defense is set up. This makes Dallas Fuel play very sheepishly and give up the entire map for free with this. But this is much closer to what I want to see, because you don't need the objective now. You need to not die and get kills. So they largely do that, peel back, make sure that their squishies don't die. Silk Thread eventually gets a Tracer pick on the backside, but chips high in, pops the Valk, 2 reses, no support ults on the enemy team. Seagull has Dragon Blade. At this point, I'm at the edge of my seat saying Dallas is going to win this round. W Mouse 1 onto the point with Valk in your back. This Dragon Blade should clean up, but they don't get onto the objective fast enough. Valk subsides, and then Seagull pops Blade on the point alone to kill Soon, but the rest of his team peels back. I don't even know what the thought process was with this. It's as simple as I think one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing. Seagull's teammates diminished the value that the Dragon Blade could get by splitting off way behind and peeling back when he wanted to go. Dragon Blade needs targets to be able to dash reset to amplify the value it gets, but if your team plays off the point, peeling back when you have an ult advantage to press, well, they got no value out of any of that. They just used Valk in order to sustain on their side of the map, didn't press their advantage with it. Blade got barely any value, and I just, it's a big kerfuffle. How did they end up losing that? It's really weird, and it's clearly a communication issue, but they're good enough to win these maps. They're just split on what they want to be doing when, which is causing a lot of problems and forcing them to give up rounds that they should be winning. With the next map coming through, I think by this point, Tilt has probably settled in. The Fuel are not very confident in their system, not very comfortable with the rotating musical chairs lineup that they're utilizing. This Numbani map was full of issues, Soon being able to backcap on Streets phase after the team fight was over. He was hiding in the stairwell, nobody saw him, and after the team dispersed, well, he sneaks it in. That allowed for probably one of the biggest ult economy swing plays we've ever seen, because Dallas popped everything to defend, meaning that the Valiant was going to come back with an ultimate advantage anyway, probably going to win that next fight, but Soon wins it for them with a back cap, meaning that that advantage is now getting pushed into third, where it's not hard to see who's going to win that one. They finished the map easily, but obviously, even worse, Envious has a comedy of errors attacking onto point 1 and doesn't even unlock the payload. Now, on their attacking side, they go for this Lucio Mercy combo again, which is questionable in terms of its effectiveness. What it definitely can do is allow for you to peel back in order to farm up Mercy ult safely, which is more or less what the Dallas Fuel tried to do. They get picked off on their first fight, but re-engage, do farm up the Mercy Valk earlier than the Valiant do, and they're able to use it actively like sort of you would with a nano boost, and how I think you're going to have to use Mercy Valk moving into the new patch when the instant reses are no longer available to you. The early Valk advantage is pretty legit because it can set you up to be in a better spot for when the enemy tries to Valk, and actually, in fact, XQC is going to be able to take out Kariv's Valkyrie, which happens off screen, but Taimou is running for his life out of the play, when really it would have been better if he was able to somehow get himself back towards his team so they can support him to nullify the damage out of the Winston ult. But because he gets himself more or less pressed against the bus here, it allows for some primal rage juggling that frags Taimou, and then Harry Hook plays a little bit too close to the enemy tanks, takes too much damage to him. This leads for an opening for Silk Thread to pop his tactical visor to kill the Lucio, not letting him pop the sound barrier in time, which in turn makes Effect's Dragon Blade far easier to kill, whereas if they just used both ults to confidently win this fight, they would have been set and controlling the entire point, be set up for the retake, but instead, things go from bad to worse. They don't have a damage character alive. Chips High-End does get the res off on Harry Hook, but we're still in like a weird 3v3 stall situation, so this sound barrier is just not going to be timed to be useful. It blocks a bit of damage, but it just decays and they're not able to get any value out of it anyway. And now Valiant come back with a respawn advantage. These types of misplays with ultimates is something that we're not really used to with the Dallas Fuel. Their timing on these things is usually a lot better. And with a minute 40 left on the clock, there's not much left to do. Fate's actually in quite an interesting position here. The entirety of Dallas Fuel runs past him to get to the squishy targets, but this allows him to have some perfect tracking through the enemy team comp, whittle down Chips High-End quite low, pop his primal to take out both healers, and even though Taimou is able to demech and kill Envy on the Diva, it's going to be really difficult for the Fuel to sustain themselves with no healers up. Kariv has the Valkyrie on the retake, and that's pretty much it. Uncle pops the Transcendence at the end of this fight, overusing the support ults, making for a big opening for Effect to come back with his Dragon Blade potentially. Silk Thread knows this, so he's playing way off in the distance so he doesn't get bladed, but coming up the street, Effect is far too forward facing, allowing for him to get cut down from Soon popping off from the top. Soon is very good at quickly positioning in to surprise his opponents to burst down some damage, and then in this fight, nobody turns to focus the Soldier, the most important dive target on the team. Well, what do you say? Silk Thread just cleans everybody up easily through the Valkyrie, which when played right is an automatic point take, but nobody seems to know where Silk Thread is, gets off of sights and tons of damage, and that's pretty much it. Series over. Dallas Fuel crumbles. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable, but it's the amount of these mistakes that makes it really hard for me to just jump on the bandwagon and say that the Valiant are this incredible team. They might be. We'll find out this week when they really face some opposition that's going to test them. But for now, both the San Francisco Shock and the Dallas Fuel did not look prepared for their matchups in week 1. What did you guys think? Did you enjoy this analysis video? If you did, be sure to leave the video a like. It really does help us out and lets us know that you're enjoying the content. If you haven't already, please subscribe because we upload each and every day. So you're going to want to hit the bell icon so that you get notified when our videos go live. Link to the description is our Twitter, where we tweet out news, updates, and dank memes. And while you're down there, be sure to check out our Twitch page, which will be returning to soon to be announced. Look at our Twitter for announcements on that. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.